A new bipartisan stimulus proposal is set to be announced today. And it's actually about as terrible as you can imagine, coming from the likes of deal makers such as Mitt Romney, Joe Manchin, Suzanne Collins, and Lisa Murkowski. So now, the deal, let me give you the details about it. It would actually cost about $908 billion. So it's actually, uh, you know, a lot less than what Democrats in the House have been pushing for, and just a little bit more than what Republicans in the Senate have been pushing for. And so let me give you some of the details of what's in it from the Washington Post. It's from Jeff Stein. He said that this would provide about $300 a week in federal unemployment benefits, a lower amount than the $600 per week sought by Democrats, while still offering substantial relief to tens of millions of jobless Americans for 4 months. Oh. The funding, the Washington Post also reported that the agreement includes $240 billion in funding for state and local governments and a 6-month moratorium on some coronavirus related lawsuits against firms and other entities. Oh, look at that. Other things involved in this bill: $10 billion for the post office, $4 billion for student loans, $16 billion for vaccine rollouts, $45 billion in bailouts for the airlines. Oh. And then $26 billion for nutrition slash agriculture. And so now, if you were wondering, wait, what about the stimulus check? Is there going to be a stimulus check? No. No, there is none. It's not included. They're not adding this at all. But hey, corporations, at least you get your liability shield. Yay. Come on. What a disastrously bad deal. Terrible, terrible, terrible. Even ignoring the stimulus checks, by the way, the expanded unemployment is even less generous than Trump was. Remember, Donald Trump approved one, $300 plus an additional $100 benefit from the states, paid for by the states. So that's about half of what the Democrats in the House have been pushing. So that's garbage. It's absolute trash. Okay. This bill is basically, why don't you eat cake? And that's what it is. And right now, with so many people, like aid has, have the aid has run out from the last coronavirus stimulus bill. You have bills that have piled up. People that are unable to afford basic expenses that have been skipping out on paying rent because of the moratoriums because they can't afford it. Utility bills have been mounting. This with no stimulus? What a disaster. Holy shit. This is bad. And here's the thing. So everybody's calling this a stimulus measure, right? It really isn't, though. I mean, what does that even mean? Right? Words don't have a meaning anymore in this country, apparently. They keep using the word stimulus, but it ain't stimulated anything, really. They're calling it the wrong thing. I mean, look, stimulus is supposed to get the economy moving by making sure Americans can not only support themselves, pay their bills, etc., but then go out and spend money to stimulate their local economies. Okay? And that's through the purchase of goods and services. This is not a stimulus. This shouldn't be called a stimulus at all. This legislation right now, and I can argue the CARES Act was essentially the same thing. It was to prevent millions of people from being thrown into poverty. See, here's how things would work out if we had a functional democracy. The government would step in to support citizens with a UBI while the lockdowns are in place. We see this in Europe, where they do have generous UBI systems, where they do have at least some countries going with paying people 70% of their wages from their paychecks, which, again, their wages are generally higher in those countries. And so it tends to work out, but they also combine it with healthcare and other safety net programs. That ensures, of course, that people are not only able to keep up with their bills, but also when the economy opens back up, they've got a little bit of savings. They can resume spending. That, of course, feeds the virtuous cycle of more spending. Companies, with more demand, they end up hiring more, et cetera, right? In America, what have we done? Nothing. Our measures have been lackluster at best. We gave some people a one-time stimulus check. And yes, the unemployment benefits were good, $600. That should be the standard. And it was, created out of a formula that, shows that people would need that much to resume former economic activity and to be able to keep up with their bills. But like the rest of the aid in the CARES Act went directly to corporations. And then we pushed for reopening too soon. So, look, the result is, again, you've got over 250,000 Americans dead, 13 million people that are infected, hospitals that are overrun, 20 million people are at risk of being homeless, food banks are running out because the demand is so high. You've got cars that sometimes line up blocks away for basic supplies. Millions more are in danger of losing their utilities. Small businesses and hotels and restaurants, they're closing permanently in some cases. That increases unemployment because they're not going to open up. You can't open up something that is closed permanently after the recession is over, after everything opens back up. It's just not it's not going to happen. So you have people that are permanently unemployed now, and of course business owners that are in massive amounts of debt. And this stimulus, quote unquote stimulus, is the best that these idiots can come up with on Capitol Hill. Broken. This is broken. This is a broken country. We have become the shiniest third world country in the world. And I forget who said it, but America is basically a third world country with a Gucci belt. That's such a great quote. But look, again, suffice to say, the response to this was about as lukewarm as expected. With Malcolm Harris saying, "Wow, sounds very lousy." Yeah. Another person says, "No stimulus checks and a liability shield is the kind of bipartisan compromise that you hear the American people screaming out for." Oh yes. Oh please give us that corporate liability. Oh, that nothing would be so good for us regular working people who are displaced by coronavirus than to make sure our corporations are protected from coronavirus liability. Come on, dude. Yeah. Jack Allison says, kind of looks like shit, but I guess that's all we can expect in neoliberal nightmare US. 100%. 100%. And then finally, someone by the handle of Best Trousers says this: not as good as previous iterations of bipartisan proposals, far superior to the let 12 million people lose unemployment benefits in 25 days default. So, look, and by the way, Republicans would absolutely allow this to happen. You don't think that they would completely allow all this stuff to run out without doing anything? There's no reason for Mitch McConnell to do anything about this. Oh, for the good of the country, you say? When has it ever been a factor for Mitch McConnell? Look, right now we're on the edge of the cliff, right? And the same old status quo figures who barely did anything during the 2008 financial crisis are still, for the most part, there. They're still in power, and of course, and if they're not in power, then the same mentality from 2008 is still there, especially when it comes to the Senate. And that mentality is, don't worry about the people, only help the corporations. Because, well, corporations, they fund us. They're our donors. They're the ones that really matter. And so we see the result of that mindset. And so, look, the only solution to this really is to get rid of the donors. You got to get the money out of politics. I mean, this is a great example. It's going to be cited for years, decades even, of how much the American government does not work for the people, but only works for their corporate donors. Where we couldn't pass a stimulus, a second stimulus check for millions of Americans that are hurting in the wealthiest country in the world. That we couldn't pass health care for the American people in the middle of a pandemic because corporate interests are so incredibly entrenched in our system of government that they only respond, the politicians only respond to them and not to the needs of the millions of Americans. Got to get the money out of politics. If you enjoyed this video, please give us a like and share with your friends. You can subscribe and help out the channel by becoming a patron. It's patreon.com/Jeff Waldorf, or you can become a channel member as well by hitting the join button below.